you put the number 1949 up on the screen and realize how many years ago that is, makes me wonder why we haven't made a national priority out of renewing the Housing Act. And second, at the local level, if you look at Los Angeles City's zoning code, as far as I was made aware by Austin Butner about 6 months ago, that hasn't been seriously looked at since 1946. Seems to me that we ought to be looking at public policy at the local level to correspond to a national initiative. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So the first one, why haven't we renewed the Housing Act? I think that's a great question. We're still looking 65 years back to find our official federal affordable housing objectives. I think from what I've been hearing, and others may have opinions on this in the room, but now's not the time. I think that people are looking a lot to the federal government to lead the way on massive overhauls and doing grand gestures as far as reforming our affordable housing policy. Not to say there aren't interesting and creative things being done there, but just given the political state of things, I think it would probably be somewhat difficult to push through Congress right now a massive overhaul of our Federal Housing Act, even though I think you're right that it's greatly needed, and other federal statutory reforms are needed as well. It was mentioned earlier, reform of the tax credit program, which was passed in '86 and hasn't been really massively overhauled, a little bit in HERA and other acts, but pretty much remains the same as it was, fighting the challenges of 1986 as opposed to 2014. So I'm right there with you, and that's my interest. That's actually what I write about, is federal affordable housing policy reform. But just from a sort of political reality perspective, I think people are less optimistic. And then on the city level, I think you're exactly right that reforming the LA City zoning code would be a great thing. And I think there are council members, Mitch O'Farrell spoke at the UCLA summit really passionately about this issue, who are willing to do that, and where maybe there's more promise because the political divides may be less. So I think as we think about these issues, that's a great avenue and venue to be thinking about, is reforming things like the LA City zoning code. We're lucky in LA City that we've zoned traditionally very low density, so there's a lot of opportunity there that if we were to use it strategically and say upzone in particular areas without expending any more money, we could maybe provide incentives to get more affordable housing units. So I think you point to two very ripe areas. One I think is maybe a little bit more politically feasible right now than the other.
Any other questions?
Just a comment, and then if there is a solution, certainly would like to hear. The issue is one of when you include the tax incentive and write-off that upper income, middle and upper income people receive. That, I think, is setting a stage and really does not address the issue of building more units for those who cannot afford. So that the inclusion of just that in a category that is named assistance to housing does nothing in our communities or any place to improve the production thereof of the lower income. The other, and so is it a matter of, again, changing the mindset, moving back as you did to the 1949 statement of conscience that bill stood on, and reminding people that there was the heart tug, and not necessarily any intent to, I guess, privilege the already privileged, which is what that figure does when it does in fact return money to those who can't afford housing, does nothing to increase opportunities for those who can't.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for the comment, and I take your point. The day was kicked off with the idea that there's many diverse viewpoints in the room, and I guess I put that slide up to show one very strong viewpoint. So the National Low Income Housing Coalition, which is maybe the primary advocate on the side of low-income housing residents, they feel very strongly that there should be reform and parity between the mortgage interest deduction and other housing programs. I take your point, though, that maybe in some ways that sets the stage for a battle or a fight when really we're trying to bring people together on this issue, or that it's not helpful. So I guess I put that up there just to sort of get that perspective in the room. So I guess that's what I have to say.
Do you know any recent academic analysis of forms of rent control or some sort of protection for renters? I'm the mayor of Culver City, and as the mom and pop apartment complexes are being taken over by the next generation or bought by companies, we've seen rents increase by 100%. And right now we have no protection for those renters. So it's not just the creation of new affordable housing, but kind of the protection of existing affordable housing that occurs more organically in cities.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and something I didn't mention, and maybe others will today, but preservation is obviously a huge piece of this. That's what I worked on when I first got out of law school. As far as academic studies go, I'm sure folks in the room may have other ideas, but I know the Economic Roundtable studied LARSO, the Rent Control Stabilization Ordinance in Los Angeles. That was a few years ago, but might have helpful data or information about how that's worked. I'm not sure if UCLA just put out a huge report on affordable housing in general, and I'm sure you maybe saw the headlines that showed that LA was the least affordable city in the country based on looking at median incomes and rent burdens. But I'm not sure that that specifically touched on rent control, so I'll take that question back to campus and I can actually help look around, or I don't know if anyone else in the room is aware of any rent control studies. If not, maybe we could connect and could do some research and dig and see if we can find something helpful.
Thank you, first of all, for your presentation. There seems to be an awful disconnect between what is low, affordable, and just housing in general. Stigmatism as to what those are. There's a separation. There's no more government subsidies that I know of. If you do, you can help us. I'm from the city of San Fernando. We're a very small city. Problems are no different. But there seems to be a backlash as to even private enterprise just building units, single, 2 bedrooms. There's a backlash as to what affordable is. I don't know how to define it to them other than numbers. It doesn't make it. It needs to be a little more social definition. Can you help me out on that one?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure tell me if I'm not catching the full thrust of the question, but I think what you're saying is there's some uncertainty around what actually affordable housing is and sort of how we define it. The first thing that came to mind when you said that is folks at the Joint Center for Housing Studies at Harvard who put up the stats and do a lot of research on this. They think a huge part of the solution needs to come from the non-subsidized market, just from typical housing, people being able to build, or housing that's already there. And it's been an issue throughout LA recently about the idea of utilizing more and maybe even allowing units that have been traditionally not up to code, finding a way to bring them up to code and add to our affordable housing stock that way. At the end of your question, though, I got that you were saying something different, that affordable housing is maybe more than just about the units, that there's a special character to it that we miss sometimes.
You said something earlier, that we need to modernize our own codes, our own development codes, and that's probably what it's leading to me, at least at this point. Mm-hmm. Because of those disconnects, maybe our zoning and within our city needs to be clarified and changed if necessary, and it is for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that point was made earlier too, to look at local zoning codes. One other thing that comes to mind in your comment is that I think that is, the industry, one positive thing is they have come around the idea that affordable housing now is more than just housing. And we talked about permanent supportive housing, but as opposed to maybe decades ago where we were just interested in turning out units, now we've, at least for chronic homelessness, found that housing can be a bundle of goods, it can be a number of things, it can be services, it can have job support on site. So I think being more creative about what the ultimate product is that we're delivering can help to sort of redefine what we think of as affordable housing as well.
City of Calabasas was founded in 1991. I was one of the founders and the founding mayor of the city, served on the council for 20 years. And we have a general plan that goes out to 2035 and a zoning code that conforms to our general plan.
And it wasn't mentioned in my introduction that I actually attended Claremont High School, so it's an honor to be in the room with the mayor of Claremont. So if no further questions, then, is there one? Oh, a couple more in the back.
Hi, my name is Richard Brown. I'm with Sunworks Consulting. My largest client is Totalis Energy. They are an affordable housing both developer, but that was our founding. And the big thing that we're doing right now is PV, solar, and thermal in the affordable housing space, specifically in LA right now. Question I've gotten, what I've noticed having worked there and with other people both in real estate and in development, and actually live in Culver City, what is I've seen is that the biggest problem from a development standpoint of you creating affordable housing is the fact that you've only got a 10 or 15% premium to take a basic building and do the finishes that are required to turn it from just a building into luxury housing. There is no economic incentive in California or in the United States right now that is good enough to make developers give up spending 15% more and then creating something that they can then rent out or sell for twice as much. So until you address that question, you're really not going to be able to create affordable housing. And the preservation issue, it goes right back to it too. I've seen it in Culver City and the other cities that we work in. And you've got the same issue again in that anyone who comes in and wants to do, a flip is going to take, that housing that needs to be renovated, turn around, invest money, and then, sell it for a 50, 30, 100%, whatever premium they can get. And so we're not creating affordable housing. As we increase the value of the real estate in our communities and our neighborhoods, we're actually destroying affordable housing. So if we just let the public market do what it does, private industry do what it does, you're going to eventually have less and less and less affordable housing because there's no economic incentive to preserve it unless you have some sort of subsidy to do that. I've been looking at this myself for, 20 years, and I've seen nothing change. I've just seen the situation continue to get worse because of the simple fact that, if we leave private industry to be private industry, it's going to profit maximize, and because it has to. That's business. So did you guys, because I've worked with Lustin, I haven't worked with Zeman, and just wondered, what are you guys seeing or what are you advocating from a real estate standpoint to incent developers, if anything at this point, to do, for there to be the creation of subsidies that would make it worth keeping things at an affordable level?
That's a fantastic question, and I guess I would say, one thing that has recently been done on a policy level to address that, or at least improve the former situation, is we've got the density bonus law in the state of California, which was actually leading to exactly what you were saying, which was you could actually qualify for the density bonus even if your newly redeveloped project resulted in a net loss of units. So leaving the private sector to its own devices, even using public policy tools meant to address this issue, was resulting in less units. The law was just fixed to amend that problem. But to your bigger question, I guess I have a few thoughts. One is that I think there is still a robust need in our society for mission-driven institutions, mission-driven nonprofits to be doing this work, because in some cases there are projects and there are type of projects, often maybe permanent supportive housing projects with really expensive services that literally just don't make economic sense and wouldn't pencil for the private sector. But I think we are still seeing big private companies that are building affordable housing in places like the heart of downtown, right near the water on Santa Monica, and they're finding it to be not only a good thing to do, but profitable. So maybe that's one model in the wake of the loss of redevelopment money, where it is tougher to make those deals make economic sense.
But what about the case where he's fighting having to build affordable off-site housing? The gentleman that's doing all the Italiente buildings downtown, I can't remember his name.
Jeffrey Palmer?
Yes. Excellent buildings, but he's now fighting the city to not do the affordable units that he promised as part of the effort of, the businesses that he got.
That's right at the heart of the problem, and as I'm sure you're familiar, that's also a developer that was involved in litigation that brought into question the legality of inclusionary zoning statewide. So I guess I would just say, yeah, that's a challenge if people aren't living up to what they've said that they've sort of promised the city to do. I took your question to be, though, how does it make economic sense for any developer to do this when they could just, with a little bit more money, build market rate housing? And I guess I was just saying, I think there are models that people are finding, often 80-20 deals, 20% affordable, 80% market rate, mixed income, mixed use projects in high market areas where they can charge a lot for the rents, and then they can sort of somewhat cross-subsidize units in that model. So it's a huge challenge. I think there's still some models, but with public policy fixes, we had a statewide fix to the inclusionary zoning issue this year that would have clarified that inclusionary zoning is not illegal, and Governor Brown vetoed it. So that would have been one huge fix. at the Affordable Housing Summit at UCLA, there was much discussion around how an inclusionary zoning policy alone wouldn't, as a sort of blanket issue, solve our problem, and that it should be more tailored. And there were conversations before that Palmer case came down, looking at what kind of smart, intelligent inclusionary zoning policies we could implement statewide that would provide some of the incentives that you're talking about are needed. So.
Hi, my name is Beverly Kenworthy. I'm the executive director of the California Apartment Association here in Los Angeles. I had two comments. One is that the city of LA is in the process of updating their zoning code. It's a 5-year process. I think they're a year into it. You know, this is good news. It's, you know, it's over 68 years old. I think what concerns me about it, having worked at the city of Los Angeles as a planner and a council office, is the political implications of, you know, there's a very strong community, very strong and vocal communities who are against any and all kinds of density. And their voices are loud. And, you know, with 15 council members and, you know, wanting to be reelected, you know, there's not a lot of political will. So for this zoning code to be updated, there's going to have to be a huge coalition of voices talking about this issue and talking about the need for housing for it to even be successful, because we don't want to downzone certain areas. We really need to upzone to be able to address this issue effectively. The second is I just want to make a few comments about rent control or rent stabilization. They're the same thing, actually. You know, the city of Los Angeles has had rent control. We have 680,000 units that are under rent control, and we are still talking about affordability issues in Los Angeles. I think there's a number of economic studies, I don't have them off the top of my head, that have shown that it is quite often a failed policy. You know, it creates a lot of other, you know, issues that are very technical and problems for landlords being able to maintain buildings. A lot of them decide, you know what, this is too much, I want out of this business. You know, the problem is that we're talking about issues, and I think your points at the very beginning about these different philosophical perspectives on housing, where housing is a right versus, you know, it's up to the private sector to provide it, but when you have the private sector providing it, they are subject to market conditions like any other business. And whether we want to believe that or not, I mean, the fact is it's a reality. And you have to take that into consideration. You can't make people build. They're going to build if they can afford to build and if they can afford a profit. I mean, you have investors, you need to get financing. These are very complicated issues. And I think, you know, it isn't like you were talking, it's not just one solution. It's a variety of solutions. And if we don't fix CEQA, if we don't fix the ability for one or two people to sue, you know, you're going to have multiple occasions where the article in the paper yesterday about the CIM building in Hollywood that was built, two people sued and a judge threw out and invalidated all of the building's permits. You have 40 tenants in this building, and that building is no longer considered legally occupiable or whatever, you know. So, and this is two or three people suing. So this kind of reform, if we don't do this in conjunction, you know, all of the other fixes, and if we don't have the political will, then, you know, we're not going to get to where we need to go.
Thank you very much for your comments. And they're well taken. Just to where you ended with CEQA reform, I think people are coming around that from all political sides, that would be something beneficial to do. That was talked about a lot at this UCLA summit. And I take your bigger sort of philosophical point around rent control, that's what often people throw at the face of liberals, is that your policies have unintended consequences. Rent control is well-intentioned, but it leads to deterioration of buildings. In my personal perspective, I see that as somewhat of a debate. People have written really extensively on it. Duncan Kennedy at Harvard Law School was interested in that for a while, wrote a lot about different arguments, whether or not that's always the case in all settings. Then there's folks like Larry Gross of the Coalition for Economic Survival, one of the biggest tenant advocacy organizations that deals with tenants on the front lines. And when we see these issues of wages not keeping up with rents, is really in the trenches dealing with, well, what do we do when these rents are rising? And obviously fights for rent control is sort of a triage mechanism to keep people from being evicted and losing their housing. So I'd say it's a tough issue, but I take your point that policy solutions that don't look at what the consequences are long-term are not good solutions. So I guess we'll wrap up. And thank you so much for your time. And now I'll pass the program to MC Townsend, BizFed's chair-elect. Thank you.